chapter 4 today. Now, because of where we are in the semester, for your midterm grades, it's going to be based on 50% test, 40% homework, 10% class participation. That is a score I will give everybody on Friday when I post the midterm exam. Now, for the final, things move around a little differently because you also are going to have the collective bargaining exercise. Now, I know a bunch of you have extra points coming. I will be adding those on after we get done with, after I get done with one more exam today, because I'll take one day and put in everybody's extra points the same day. So if you don't see them on your test grade yet, fear not, they are coming. By the way, if you guys get to Friday, check in on your scores on Friday. If you feel I have missed something on your extra credit or whatnot, hit me up in class on Friday, because that way I make sure by the time I file midterm grades on Friday, everything is correct. Okay? Guys, just to bring some current events in, check this out. We've been talking all about GM. We've been talking about blue-collar unions. Well, HCL, who is a contractor for, you guessed it, Google, based out of Pittsburgh, voted to join a union. And this was back on the 24th of September. Now, here's what's interesting, guys. What union did HCL, which are technology employees working for Google, they joined the United Steelworkers. Guys, why is that interesting? Yes?
Because computers aren't really made of steel.
Not much anyway. When we think about things that involve steel, we think of bridges, we think cars, we think big industrial things. What does this say about the steelworkers at this point in time as a union? What does it say about them? Yes?
They're diversifying.
You got it. Guys, do you remember in the last class, I said that even though unions have membership and even though people pay dues into unions, ultimately, EJ, what is a union? It's a group, but what is it specifically? It's a word that begins with a B. It's a business. So these guys are diversifying and getting into other industries. So we're talking about people who are saying, well, if we no longer have big coal and steel and industry in Pittsburgh, unfortunately, which is true, we're going to get into other businesses. Elliot?
When I was working for Acton, which is a paper mill, basically, they make textbooks and notebooks, we were part of the United Steelworkers Union. And so they get old memos and stuff about, like, things about the union. So I read a lot about the steelworkers. They're really diverse, and they've brought in smaller unions, like the paperworker union they brought in, so that's how AGCO got in. So they're kind of like one of those unions that learns to just kind of bring other unions in if they are struggling, and they get bigger from that.
Change, adapt, evolve. Absolutely. Guys, we're going to be actually bringing in a member of management from a group in Erie that deals with shipping. Now, we're talking about the opposite side from the union, but this guy's a manager for a big shipping firm in Erie. And the major union that represents people who work on ships in Lake Erie, can you guess what union it might be? You think it might be the Mariners Union, but it's the Steelworkers Union. So we're going to have actually somebody who negotiates with the Steelworkers Union come into class to talk about us from the management perspective. Now, here's the thing. In terms of HCL, the company itself actually made its employees sit through anti-union speeches on their dime legally. Can a company do this? Yes, they can. There are some people who felt it constituted unfair labor practice. I would respectfully disagree. We're going to watch a brief video about how these folks organized and why it's such an unusual thing in 2019. What industries do we typically associate with unions? Yes? Exactly right. So we're talking about people who are not just doing high-tech work, but doing high-tech work as contractors for arguably the most powerful tech company in the world. If you're Google, you're not a fan of things like unions because you want to be able to maintain some sort of operational flexibility. At this point, these folks are basically saying, look, we're working with people from Google who we know are making way more money than us and have better benefits than we do. Did you notice the one guy, he said why he was in favor of a union? Why was he so in favor of a union? Yes? Were you raising your hand? Why was the one gentleman who spoke saying why a union was a good thing? Did you catch that? What was it, Elliot?
Was it allowed him to have more time off to see his daughter sick? Was that guy?
Yeah, that guy basically, it made it sound, didn't he look kind of like, man, this is one of these people, I don't remember the last time I had a day off, and I can't get a day off even when I'm sick. What does that say about how the employees have interacted with this employer so far? What message is that sending, guys? Help me out. Is it a positive or negative kind of experience?
Like a negative experience that makes it seem like the employer hasn't really done anything for them, and then it makes it seem like that's why they wanted to unionize, to make things reasonable.
Even the look on that guy's face, wouldn't the look of a guy who's seen too much? It's like, this guy looked like he was like, man, am I tired? I am so tired because I've been working for the last 700 days without a day off. And if you've got basically an employer who's making it that difficult to get a day off, that could be indicative of other things that are happening here too. We're talking about a very small group of people, like 80 employees unionizing. We're not talking hundreds or thousands of people. I think that shows a pretty good grassroots effort. A couple other points that are worthy of note here, guys, and I know this crosses over a little bit with my HR class, but in the United States, how many legally required days off do companies have to give employees? 0. Goose egg. And so we're talking here, for example, these folks may be victims of that lapse in our economy, that lapse in our legal system. And in fact, in terms of all first world countries, we are the only one, to my knowledge, that does not have any legally required paid days off. Any other thoughts on this, guys? Is this something, as far as a movement within the white-collar sector, that's going to take off? What do you think? Yes or no? And don't know is an okay answer, too. But why might it take off? Why might it not take off? Well, so, yes, go ahead, Corey.
I would say I don't think so, because like one of the benefits I think of unions, like it makes it like safer. I feel like in that type of job situation, it's not really as much risk.
Somebody's not going to have a physical risk by going into an office job, generally speaking. I agree with you. Will somebody do me a favor, because some of you have your laptops and phones, will somebody look up for me on Google, what is the average length of the American work week? And there's lots of different sources for this information, so give me one that seems credible. What are you finding on Google? Yes?
Americans work on average of 34.4 hours a week, longer than their counterparts in the world's largest economies. Many work even longer.
So we're talking about, the many sources have pointed out that in the United States, we have one of the longest work weeks on average of the globe. Our economy is shifting to what these days? We're no longer industrial. What are we? We're a service economy. So we're talking about more white-collar workers. We're talking about people who are putting in longer hours. And here's the other trick, guys. We still haven't reached staffing levels in some companies or pay levels from pre-recession, pre-2008 levels. So you've got a lot of folks who are working in industry who are feeling what we refer to as stressed and pressed. And the other thing, too, guys, let's go back to 2008. And during the period of 10% and 12% unemployment and mass layoffs, the people who were left in these companies had to do more work to keep their jobs. Employers are now expecting that in many ways to be the new normal. I think in some ways that's why we may see some folks engaging in labor unions who maybe normally would not have. To make one other point, the way that unions are changing at this point in time, there's a group called SEIU. Has anybody ever heard of this union? Service Employees International. Guys, they represent people who work in the cleaning industry. They represent people who work in custodial industries. They also represent registered nurses. So we're talking about people who are in an industry that's completely unrelated to the core business this union used to serve, and now they're getting into it as well. I know this because our local UPMC hospital, all the RNs, and full disclosure, including my wife, are members of that union. So unions are diversifying at this point in time. Guys, let me ask you, before we get into a lick of information on this slide, I want you to think about, when you get your first job, what would make you happy with your employment? What are things that companies could do to make you actually happy with the way you're treated at work? Let's go around the room. Jared, what's something that would make you feel well treated at work?
Probably a flexible schedule.
Yeah, are you counting my schedule into this? So do I feel good about that? Rashawn, what's something that would make you feel appreciated at your employer? Benefits, absolutely. Emily, what's something that make you feel good?
Like
let's take care of our people. Is there anything else that would make us feel good? Yes?
Getting paid enough to pay my bills.
Yeah, getting a decent day's pay for a decent day's work. Other things that play into this as well. Let's talk about psychologically other things. Yes? That's huge, by the way. Sometimes that's bigger than pay, to be recognized for the effort you're putting in. What are other things that you enjoy? Put it even in context of a classroom or an employer. What are things that psychologically make you feel good? Yes?
Like I don't know, like a healthy interaction between people in your environment.
Being treated with respect and feeling safe and secure in your job. Guys, what it really comes down to, when companies take a humanistic attitude, that we basically say we're going to treat people with respect, we're going to enforce the golden rule, we're going to treat people how we'd like to be treated, we generally don't have problems. Unions generally do not appear in industries where people are treated well and a company has respect for its employees. Some of the ways in which we have positive human resource management, this is out of our text, but I love it, is the idea that instead of having status symbols and rank, we interact as people. Let's say, for example, guys, we all work together. And for sake of the argument, I'm your boss. And you have two options. I could say you can call me Mr. Tonkin or you can call me Ken. What's the difference when you call me by my first name?
It's a much more casual, more approachable situation. And
it establishes a peer relationship. For purposes of the classroom, for example, and I don't do this to maintain arrogance. I do it because it's a bit of a way we do things in academia. That's why I have you call me by my title. If you get into the working world, if you get into companies where people use first names and don't rely on their titles to get by, people generally have better working relationships. Who here has ever worked for somebody who is, I want to phrase this exactly how I'm thinking it without swearing into the microphone. Who here has ever worked with somebody who was an absolute idiot and only had their job in their control because of their title? You ever been in that movie? You will in the corporate world at some time too. We call those people, there's a term for those people in the business, they call them empty suits. What does that mean? What's an empty suit, Elliot?
Without a suitor position, they would have no respect, or they really shouldn't have a job.
Exactly right. This guy or girl looks good in pinstripes and they carry themselves like a boss. But in reality, they don't really understand the company or their own people. I think surroundings are important too. For example, if we have a well-designed work environment, we talk about this in HR as well, so I apologize, we do have some crossover. But if you're taking impediments out of the work environment that make it hard for people to do their jobs, if you make it easier for people to do their job, they're generally happier. And that includes, honestly, safety as well. What about employment security? That's a big thing that unions push for. Example, do we, even if we're not a union shop, do we put some emphasis on things like seniority? I think that performance management generally should be based around whether or not somebody's good at doing the job, but putting some consideration into security, for example, is a good idea. So I think, for example, how does somebody make somebody feel secure in their job, Corey?
Feel secure.
Yeah, like if you were working for a company, how do you feel more secure?
For me, I like knowing like people, like knowing their intention, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're having open conversations, for example. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to do fine on that test. And so are you, Emily. You're going to do fine on that test. So please, let's focus at the front of the room here, guys. In terms of promotion within, if we're showing that we promote people and bring them up from our own ranks, we're saying we care and you have a chance to go ahead and be a part of the company as well. Competitive benefits and pay are important too. This is a big one though, guys. Are you listening to your management? Or I should say as a manager, listening to the employee. Are we saying, for example, we know better than you? Are we giving you an opportunity to have a voice in here as well? And this is a big one too. Careful grooming of managers. And what we mean by that is succession planning, guys. Succession planning means we are setting up a way that people internally have a way to move up within the company. When you promote people in your own ranks, what message are you sending to them? What message are you sending? Yes?
That they're being recognized and rewarded.
We believe in you guys. We're going to promote you from within. We're going to pull you up through our ranks. It's a good message to send. Guys, before we move into double breasting, because we've been going pretty solid here for about 20 minutes, I'm going to stop for my first question or comment of the day. Question or comment about anything today, guys? Yes, sir.
Have you ever met like a CEO or a top rate manager that you thought was just an empty suit?
I've worked for him. I absolutely worked for people who... I worked for a man whose name I shall not mention, because mentioning his name is kind of like mentioning the devil. I'm afraid he actually might appear, and so I'm not going to mention his name. This guy basically, in 8 years of working for him, never permitted me to call him by his first name. I have traveled 20,000 air miles a year with this man, and he never let me call him by his name. He let me drive him around the West Coast as his chauffeur, and I was never able to call him by his first name. This guy basically made it his mission to make people around him hate themselves. He would come in on weekends just to criticize the work people had submitted to him and what he had ultimately managed to do. At meetings, you got punished for having an idea. If he asked you what you thought and you said, he'd come up with 10 reasons why your idea stinks. And after that, nobody talked. Then he'd yell at us for not having ideas. It was called negative motivation. I learned so many lessons from that man in terms of how I would never manage a person. And that is, you play upon people's strengths. If somebody's good at something, get out of their way and let them do it. Don't find ways to demoralize people and make them not want to work. Find ways to embrace what they're good at and let them do it. And this guy had the opposite opinion. He hated himself. This man hated his own guts and wanted everybody around him to feel as bad about himself as he felt about himself. So that is the worst person I ever worked with. I've done some therapy. I'm over it now. I don't cry myself to sleep anymore. But it was early in my career, and I learned exactly the kind of manager I did not want to be. So that's an excellent question. Sorry for that impassioned response. It's funny, man. You will have that boss or that company you work for who will negatively teach you what to do in your career. In other words, they'll give you enforcement on the things you should not do. Who here's ever had a situation where they got treated like a jerk in their own company? Yes, what happened?
One of the jobs I worked at, basically like you didn't know what was expected of you, so like you were constantly getting yelled at for stuff. Like when you try to take initiative and do things on your own, then you also get yelled at because you might be doing the wrong thing, but you were never really told what to do. So it makes it just like more stressful because like if you don't do anything, you get yelled at for not working. If you do start doing things, then you're probably going to be doing the wrong thing. So it just sucks.
Yeah, at some point you're like, there is no right answer. By the way, that prepared you for marriage. If you can live in a situation where sometimes there's no right answer, you're so ready to get married. I swear to God. But here's an example from the world of psychology, guys. In the world of psychology, there were experiments, and I can't remember the experimenter, and they were cruel experiments, but they took dogs, and they put them in cages. And what they would do with the dog, they would electrify the cage randomly. So the dog would jump up saying, wow, this sucks, I'm standing on an electric cage. And after a while, they just left the current on so that the electricity was on constantly. What did the dog do eventually? Did it keep jumping? No, eventually the dog would lay down and say, there's no escape, I'm just going to lay down and take it because there's nothing else I can do. It's a cruel experiment, and something I would never want to see repeated, but it sends a message about how we treat people too. In that work environment, sooner or later, people are going to say, there's no chance. I'm either not going to stay here or I'm going to go away and do something else. Yep. Good question, guys. Guys, we have a concept called double-breasting, and we talk about double-breasting in the 90s. Double-breasted suits were big. And has anybody ever seen one? We associate them with swing bands, for example. Feel free to look these up. But double-breasting means you're attempting in your company to have a union branch and a non-union branch. So let's say, for example, I own a company, and I'm General Motors, and I make cars in union factories that are all covered by the United Auto Workers. If I try to set up a separate company, just to have a non-union branch, that is called double-breasting, and it's something you can't get legally done. The National Labor Relations Board sets up rules for how we check if somebody is quote-unquote double-breasting or not. Here are some of the test parts of this. Are these operations interrelated or not? In other words, if I have a GM plant, one plant makes engines and another one makes transmissions, are those related industries or not? If you have an engine in a car, no transmission, is it going to go? Hell no. So you got an engine and transmission. So those are pretty interrelated. Now you might argue, for example, if you're a company that makes orange juice and cigarettes, those two things are not related. Maybe you can't get away. And there are companies that do that. Philip Morris. Look up R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris and see what companies they actually own. They own Kraft. They own all these big companies. So you might say, well, they're not related at all. Maybe you can get away with that. What about your centralized control of labor relations? What that means is you have the same people supervising all these factories. If they ultimately fall along the same chains of command, you may actually not have two separate organizations here and common management again. Again, if you have one company financially controlling all these things, basically, the more centralized your control is, the more chance that you are running afoul of double-breasting. I'm not going to read this to you, but there are two concepts. The concept is single employer versus alter ego. This is not in our text. It's something from the National Labor Relations Board. A single employer means, for example, if you've got somebody who is really the single employer for all these folks, then yeah, you might have an argument that all these branches should allow to be organized. You cannot set up a separate company just to have a non-union shop. An alter ego, where does that term come from? What kind of entertainment do we associate that term with? I'll give you a hint. Avengers, Spider-Man, Batman. Superheroes. Everybody's got an alter ego. So is that our other side of our operations? Is that our alter ego, or is that actually part of us? There are four things that we look at. We look at how interrelated the operations are, how centralized the control is, how centralized the management is, and how centralized the actual ownership is. When we're trying to determine if somebody is violating the law under NLRB, there's not one criteria we look at. We look at all of them together. So again, for the alter ego, what extent do we have identical management, for example? If we've got the same people managing both companies, we really don't have separate identities. We just have an alter ego. And again, this is stuff we will cover again as we get further into actual NLRB law. But let's see what your thoughts are. Tell me if we've got a single employer or not. We got Tonkin Motors. Tonkin Motors has a collective bargaining agreement with United Auto Workers at all 10 of the plants they manage. They're making a really cool off-road vehicle. This is an actual military-grade armored off-road vehicle. But let's say we're making the Willis Wheelie. And this is a four-door as we make it now. We decided that we're going to make it two-door. So we're going to open a new facility in a different state that's going to be not union. Is this a single employer or not? Adam, you think yes. Tell me why.
Because essentially
You're just branching off like a new product of your product line. You're making almost the same product. You're just opening
You're basically doing something that's the same thing you're already doing, except you're taking two doors off. It's the same product. I think the NLRB would say if you're trying to open a non-union factory in a different state to build the same truck, you're obviously trying to create an alter ego when in reality it's the same company. All right, we got Joni Smith owns a supermarket. By the way, when I did a stock video or stock image search for a grocery market, this was one of the first pictures I thought of. This is one of the creepiest pictures I think I've ever seen. Like, nobody's going to talk to this guy with his onions like that. This is very weird, and he's showing way too much interest in this customer. So I apologize for the weird image. It's what came up. We got Joni Smith, who owns a supermarket, and her employees are all members of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. She's going to open a Taco Bell right across the parking lot, the corner of her parking lot, from her grocery store. Is she a single employer or not? She might need to do some training of her employees if this is the way they're interacting with customers. But is this a single employer or not? What are your thoughts? Is a Taco Bell equivalent to a grocery store? I would say not. I think that you could get away with saying this is not the same. I think you could get away with saying that this should be a separate agreement with its employees. I mean, if she were opening another grocery store, if we had another grocery store across the parking lot, say, for example, that sold nothing but organic and free-range products, I think you still have the argument that's really a branch of the existing supermarket. But this Taco Bell is a different entity. Here we had one more in here and it didn't come over. Sorry about that, guys. Got thrown off. Guys, some of the other things companies will try to do to build loyalty in their companies is to come up with basically things that equate to union types of approaches. When somebody in a labor union, for example, tries to say, hey, we're going to take your opinion seriously, when somebody has a problem and they're in a union, what do they file? It's a G word. What do we call it, Justin? Grievance. We file a grievance. Well, in a non-union environment, we still might have what we refer to as ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution Procedures. And it means we got an employee handbook that tells us how do we resolve problems. We also might get our employees involved in committees, saying, hey, you can have a voice in how the employment happens, even if we don't have a collective bargaining agreement. We also have this idea of open door policies, meaning if somebody's got a problem, you can talk right to the manager. And again, we might even create things that look very much like a union. For example, if somebody gets in trouble, we could give them a chance to appeal, even if we don't have a formal union. We can give them a chance to plead their case in court. We might even have what we refer to as peer-reviewed committees. What this stuff really comes down to is what we refer to as union substitution. It means we're on paper appearing to operate much in the way that a union environment does in a non-union shop. Why is this less advantageous in some ways than an actual union for employees? If we're talking about creating procedures like this, ultimately, why might it not be as powerful as a union? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but why might a union be more powerful? If you're in a union, you're covered by what? What piece of paper? I'm sorry? I'm thinking more of a collective term. It begins with a C. Collective bargaining agreement. So all of these folks do not have a collective bargaining agreement. You're still under an individual contract. What might also be an advantage in a union shop versus a non-union shop under these same criteria? Who's controlling these committees ultimately? The employer is controlling these committees. So, and again, I think there are well-run employers. For example, I work in a non-union shop and we have a big voice in all of these things because we have well-run committees and a high dispersion of power with employees. But ultimately, if you're using this as a substitution for a union, the employees still ultimately don't have as much power as the company does in this regard. Any other ways you can see where the union shop might have more power? What else can a union bring to bear that employees in this scenario cannot? Yes? Exactly right, and they can get their nationals involved. So in terms of things, for example, if you had folks deciding that they wanted to go on strike, and by the way, strikes have happened in non-union shops, but you're not getting strike benefits, you're not going to get vacation time, and you have no guarantee you're getting your job back either. Not to say you always have a guarantee in a union shop either, but that's some of the difference. Some of the other things that businesses try to do to keep unions out is to operate. We're moving into unions now, but what we're moving into with the non-union shops, for example, the more participation that people are allowed to have in the organization of the union, or the company rather, is what comes down to keeping a union out. Let's reset this. We're going to get into, for example, if we've moved out of the non-union companies, we're moving into the union companies. Once you already have a union in place, you have a barrier and a distance between the rank and file and management. So you guys all here are members of our labor union. You guys over here are management. At this point, if management wants to ask you to do something, what does management have to refer to, labor union? What guides our interactions? We mentioned the term already today. What is it? You got it. Your collective bargaining agreement. So that's a barrier that comes in between the two. So the casual relationship that maybe we enjoyed when we were a non-union shop no longer exists because our interactions are done through a guide, through a series of instructions called our collective bargaining agreement. Anytime we want to interact between the two sides, we got to refer to that. Our guys here at management, We decided, for example, we want to start producing a new product. It's something that had not been covered in our collective bargaining agreement. Management, can we ask these guys to do it without negotiation? We cannot. We're going to have to negotiate a new part of our agreement. And the union over here, if you're going to be asked to do additional duties and tasks, are you going to do them for the money you're already making? Absolutely not. That's an example of the barrier between the two sides. When I say these things, guys, I don't mean it's good or bad. I mean it is how it is. So, once you have a labor union in your shop, what we're going to be doing, guys, is we're going to have unions as our representative of our staff, and those staff people are going to operate through their union. So in terms of a labor and management cooperation strategy, what that means is that labor and management are regularly meeting and talking about this stuff. They're still going to be coming at odds sometimes, but that's not to say that we can't have positive relationships, particularly when the economy's good. When the economy's good and everybody's making money, for example, the United Auto Workers might get really good deals. Let's think about this for a second, guys. If we went through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, what were the big car companies in the United States? What were the cars that everybody drove? Oh, we got some classic car people in here. I know you know. Call them the big three. Who am I talking about? Ford is a big one. Who else? Ford, Chevy, and who else? The other big. Chrysler. So the big three companies were selling cars like crazy. Nobody in their right mind in the United States in the 1960s was going to drive a Volkswagen or a Toyota, and we had not even heard of Mazda or Hyundai yet. So we didn't have competition. So people were very big on buying American cars. If you're the United Auto Workers, that means here the good times are going to roll. We're going to raise our rates. We're going to get better benefits for our constituents because the companies are making money. Everybody's making money. When the economy goes south, then we get more adversarial relationships as well. So in terms of a union itself, usually has a strategic plan. If you're any kind of organization, you got a mission statement. What's your mission statement tell you, Kenny? If you have a mission statement, what's it all about?
Tells you why the company exists.
Exactly right. So if you're a union, you got a mission statement too. You're basically saying this is the reason we exist. We exist to represent United Mine Workers and people working in the mining industry. Another part of the strategic plan comes down to looking at the external environment. What we're looking at here is what will the market bear. We got two sides of the room here, guys. This side of the room is a technology workers union. This side of the room is the United Mine Workers. So guys, the United Mine Workers, are you in a strong economic bargaining position right now? Where's most of our energy? How's most of our energy produced these days, guys? It's not coal anymore. Coal's a part of it. We're getting competition from natural gas. We're getting competition from solar and renewable and all these things. Coal is really facing a lot of problems from a regulatory standpoint. You guys as the United Mine Workers are in a tougher spot to negotiate, perhaps, than the folks who are in the technology union. Technology union, why are you guys potentially in a stronger negotiating position? Elliot?
Because the world's going more into technology.
Yeah, because it's a hot industry right now, and if you're working for companies like Google, you got the world at your fingertips, man. So we're also going to look at what are our strengths and weaknesses. Well, if we have a union, for example, that consists mostly of older members, well, that's a problem. If we have a union that consists of people who work in industries who are on the way out, that's a problem. We're going to be looking at long and short-term objectives. For example, if you're the United Auto Workers and it's 2008, 2009, you're not looking at big raises. You're looking at survival. You're looking at, hey, how can we get through this recession and still keep our members employed? And that means you're going to negotiate from a different place. And then you also get into what we refer to as strategy, development for growth and survival. And what we mean by that is how are we going to grow our membership, how are we going to produce benefits for them, and how are we going to participate in the economy in the future. Guys, why are labor unions themselves facing such a challenge in the 21st century in the United States? How is this country changing? It's going to be challenging to labor unions. I'll give you a hint. We watched the movie about the glass plant. I'll show you some videos about some other things that are happening in corporate America. Why are labor unions finding themselves at a crossroads in terms of growth and survival? Yes?
All the industries that usually have unions countries are kind of going to other countries?
So we're offshoring, and if we're not offshoring, what are we doing? Because you're absolutely correct. What's another thing that's happening in industry right now? Yes?
Automation.
You got it. So we're talking about, for example, did you guys remember in the movie when the president of the glass company is walking around and in Chinese they're all speaking to the employees basically like, yeah, Jared will be gone next week. I won't need Jason by 2 weeks from now. Kenny, he's got another month. And they're all talking and these people are working in the background like, what are these guys talking about? And what they're talking about is, we don't need these guys anymore. So that changes the way in which we negotiate. So in terms of how a strategic process happens, guys, our big collective bargaining exercise is going to be at the end of the semester, but that is part of your strategy. Your strategy is, how can we bargain here, guys? Right now, if you were the United Auto Workers and you're going up against GM, what is your leverage right now, guys? If you all are the United Auto Workers, what do you have over GM right now? Because you're all on strike. What do you got over? Yes?
I mean, they operate the plant, so
Yeah.
they make the product.
You can't make cars right now. By the way, is anybody here, by show of hands, who considers themselves a lover of cars? Who here is excited at all about the new mid-engine Corvette? Are you psyched about this car? I am too. It's like the best looking American car. $60,000 or something that looks like a Ferrari? Sign me up. Well, here's the deal. All those people who ordered those Corvettes 6 months ago are not going to get them right now because they can't make them because the factories are shut down. So if you're somebody who was buying a sports car and you put a deposit down on a Corvette, you're not feeling very good about this right now. And at this point, you're still probably more mad at GM than you are at the union because you just want your damn car. That's leverage. So collective bargaining says, where are we? What can we possibly get? Then we talk about political activities. Remember we talked about the National Labor Relations Board. How many people are on it? 5. And we put them at different points. And are they elected or are they political appointees, guys? You got it. So we're saying, how can we politically lobby to get our needs and wants satisfied? I'll give you an example. I was in D.C. Days after Obama's first election. When I say this, your politics are your politics. I support whatever you believe. President Obama was a very pro-union president. The Teamsters Union put a giant banner over the front of their building thanking President Obama for his support of unions and congratulating him on his re-election. I guarantee you that members of the AFL-CIO had been meeting with members of his team regularly to say, we're going to endorse your guy for president, but when he gets in, you better be making laws that are favorable to us, or the next time around, we'll support the other guy. And guys, right now, if I were in the Democratic Party and I were concerned about unions, I would definitely be considering the effect that the current president is having on unions, because a lot of labor unions are backing Trump because they believe he's pro-American labor. I leave that to your own conscience to decide what you think there. But we're talking about very non-traditional lines of support, because the Democrats typically were the party of unions. It's not so anymore. It's much more complicated. We get into broader organizing. It means, how are we going to pull other people into our union? So broader organizing means recruiting. In terms of effective strategy, how do we combine all of these things between getting better benefits for our membership, or at least appropriate benefits if we're in a down economy, making the law favor us, and also getting more people involved? That creates ultimately a successful union. So this is just a sample. We're not going to read this verbatim. But what it comes down to, guys, the AFL-CIO, who is the union of unions, has a mission statement. They basically are saying that we want to build people into the union workforce. We want to be a political voice. We want to provide new voices. What they're talking about there, this statement, we will change our unions to provide a new voice to workers in a changing economy. What are they saying there? We just talked about at the beginning of class today. Who are they talking about? What new economy? What do you think? What do you think? Who are they talking about?
I'm not sure.
We're talking about people in industries that aren't normally associated with unions. We're talking about technology. We're talking about the emerging economy. And so by creating a labor movement for the new voice of the new economy, they're talking about appealing to industries that normally would not have been unionized. Here, for example, they've got their strategic intent. This is all out of our text. And they're talking about how they're going to get new people in, how they're going to brand themselves, how they're going to set standards for who gets in, how they're going to lobby in the government. Guys, they have a strategy for all these things because they're a well-run organization. Whether or not you believe in their mission, they know what the bleep they're doing in terms of outreach. They take it all the way down, for example, to public relations and communications. Again, I'm not going to read all this to you. These are excerpts from the Communications Workers Association. And these are the folks, for example, who are going on strike with Verizon. They will even tell you in their strategic plan how they plan on reaching out to other people. Questions, guys? Questions, comments, or discussion? Guys, here's the deal. It is 10:44. If I can get one quality question, I will let you go 5 minutes early today. A quality question from the group. Yes, sir.
All right, so IPAs are kind of going down in the beer trend now, which finally, thank God. But kind of right now,
Them's fighting words, buddy. But keep going.
So what do you think the next trend's going to be that's going to fill the gap?
I hope to God that sours go away.
You don't like sours?
I think sours are an affront to beer fans. I think they like.
Now that's just fighting words.
Don't sell me contaminated, spoiled beer. Give me my IPA.
We made a sour at PBC that tastes like a grapefruit.
I can drink a grapefruit then. I will try it. But I think so. The next trend, I think people are going to go back to traditional lagers. We're already seeing it. They're calling them dad beers.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my opinion. Though not related, it is a quality question. So you guys, we can wrap it early. So, thank you guys.
Never said had to be related.